West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
I read in your piece that it is your outfit, your former Marine unit, that was sent to secure the airport in Afghanistan, and you say in your piece you wish you could be there. What are those feelings like tonight?
I think it's very mixed to see what's been unfolding over the past 3 or 4 days. I think for those of us who, gave the better parts of our youth and our lives to that, we hope that, this thing that was the most meaningful thing that we would basically do in our lives would amount to something. And to see the utter collapse and failure of that effort is very, very difficult to watch. And yet at the same time, the mixed part about it is that we know that the war cannot go on any longer, that 20 years is already too long and too many people have died for this. So it's a very mixed blessing to see the end of the war, and my heart goes out to the Afghan people that we are essentially betraying because our interests no longer align with theirs, and we need to do absolutely everything in our power to get as many of our Afghan allies out as possible.
We did behave basically exactly the same way in our exit from Vietnam, which was much worse, and we left much more behind, including thousands of babies fathered by American troops to women left behind in Vietnam. It's just a much darker story. And I've always wondered, for people like you, when you were in Afghanistan, did you have that picture of Vietnam in your minds when you were thinking about how this might end?
I think at the time that we were there, I deployed in 2010 to 2011. And shortly after I returned, we killed Osama bin Laden. I mean, literally weeks after I got back. And so part of me thought that the war would end there in some semblance of resolution tied to why we originally went there on 9/11. And it's really only been in the past decade that I've come to see the parallels with Vietnam, which originally I would have said, that's going to be Iraq. Iraq is going to be just like Vietnam. And now to see it as the kind of so-called good war turn into that is incredibly tragic.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me about this, having lived through Vietnam, I was in high school watching Vietnam unfold. And in those days in America, you could be a high school student and be smarter than the president and smarter than the Secretary of Defense and be right. Turned out to be right, that this was wrong and we were going to leave and lose and be defeated there. What amazed me in the 21st century is that lesson seemed to be forgotten, because those of us who can remember that day in 1975 when that final helicopter left Saigon, one thing we believed was, well, this can never happen again. And it seems to just require the passage of time and enough new soldiers to be born long after that war that can enter another one basically on the same terms.
Absolutely. I think, I've talked to Vietnam veterans who read things that I've written and feel that's exactly what they felt coming out of Vietnam. And they are in shock that this could have happened twice in their lifetimes. And for me, I look forward and I still see the reaction to President Biden ending the war. And this extreme degree that both, former national security officials, ambassadors, generals think that he's making the wrong decision still, as you mentioned. I have very little faith that we're going to, do the right thing the next time. But I do hope we do. And I think the more that we're able to talk about the limits of American power, which we've seen over the past 20 years, that maybe the more likely we will be to avoid the next unnecessary war.
You poignantly asked the question in your beautifully written piece, will our children suffer the same? And I now think they will, and I didn't think that even just a few weeks ago, because what I'm seeing here is the reaction to what's happening in Afghanistan to people who are young enough to not have seen the same thing in Vietnam is so raw and so intense that it tells me, so the Vietnam experience was forgotten. It was not used as a model for this. People didn't build it into their psyches as they were watching this. And so now they're shocked. And that seems like a cycle that can repeat in human behavior.
Absolutely. And I think, we're always having to relearn these lessons with each new generation. But I think also, Americans are generally not tuned into foreign policy. For many of them, except when a 9/11 happens, it doesn't affect them directly. And so what ends up happening is you have, foreign policy experts, politicians, generals, people of this nature, who are basically able to kind of guide America's policy, unimpeded and without any kind of check and balance. And, for 20 years, there's been essentially a bipartisan consensus about, the Afghanistan war. It's gone through Bush, it's gone through Obama, and it's gone through Trump. And finally, it's President Biden who's ending it, thankfully. But, the American people are going to have to figure out how that their government has a limited power when it comes to foreign policy, and that, frankly, their government lies to them regularly when it comes to these issues, as we've seen in the Afghanistan papers and we saw earlier in Vietnam with the Pentagon papers.
Yeah, I mean, the country learned that General William Westmoreland was lying about the Vietnam War. And so you had, more than 100 million people in America who learned, do not believe generals, do not believe the modern post-World War II general during war. What's happened in the news media over the last, 30 years or so has been a kind of new reverence for military commanders with a kind of a projected capacity onto these military commanders that, as far as I can tell, they have not earned.
No, that's absolutely the case. I mean, for 20 years, the generals promised that they would win the war, and they didn't. And yet, now many of them have gone on to lucrative and highly respected careers when they should be cowering in shame, frankly. And it's a bit of a tragedy that we've allowed that to happen. I think as well, when the media kind of looks at the generals, they say, how could Biden have ignored the advice of his military leaders or gone against it? Well, we live in a democracy where a civilian president is supposed to do exactly that. They're supposed to exercise judgment, not just from a military perspective, but from the best interest of the nation as a whole. And so now as we shift, from a military phase to a more diplomatic and kind of international relations phase with both Afghanistan and the Taliban, we need to break out of that mindset that the military is the solution to all our problems.
It is Thursday, the 19th of August of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Well, hurricane season seems to go year-round now, doesn't it? But we are in what was traditionally known as hurricane season. So those along the, Gulf Seaboard and the Eastern Seaboard do take care. In fact, I saw the trajectory of this hurricane that's wending its way up the Eastern Seaboard. And Boston, it looks like you're slated for a hit. Boston. All right. Take care. Run. There's nowhere to run to. Yep. It looks like Joe's still being dragged for being to blame for Afghanistan, just as the Republicans planned it so many years ago. And I don't get it. Well, I do get it. But the press is just like, they're just playing along. Or is this not really play? Is it work? I don't know. I guess after a period of time when you've, lived long enough, survived a lot of tragedies, or even a few, or one. Anyway, if you live long enough and you've survived, because that's how you're living, is that you tend to see things that are so obvious. And you wonder why it's not obvious to everybody else. It's just so obvious to me what the press is doing. It's just, I guess when I was younger, I could pretend like they're not really doing that, are they? And now I'm at that impatient stage in life where it's like, God, they're doing it again. So I try not to let it get to me because if it's expected, well, no need to act like it's a surprise. And they are. They're playing the game. They're working the refs. And it looks like history will look at Joe. No, it won't. They're trying to make him into Jimmy Carter. I keep saying that they're trying to make this into his Jimmy Carter's helicopter crashing in the dust storm desert incident, and it's not really working. Now, Nicole Wallace, I told everybody, and I've said all along, we might talk to somebody in a restaurant, not know anything of their background, and determine, those are really nice people. Then you find out they're like serial killers, working for the government. So when I saw all of these former Bush people getting into liberal media, I said, look out. They soften you up, and then eventually you will be stabbed in the back. There was a group in 1930s Europe, Germany to be exact, that would do the same thing. But I'm not saying that the current crop here are full-blown. They might be good Republicans, just like the good Germans of old. But I said, look out. Now, Nicole Wallace, I got to admit, I kind of like her. She has a nice demeanor and, engaging. You wanna stick around. Don't go anywhere. So, but when she came out and sort of like was running at odds with a lot of the other punditry in the media, where she set up the scenario and truthfully and factually that it seems like it's Joe Biden and the people of the United States versus the media. Now how quickly the tide has turned. Even Nicole Wallace is blaming Joe for all that is going wrong in Afghanistan. Not only right now, but they'll use right now as the excuse to place the full blame for 20 years of, what were we doing? I'll tell you what we were doing. Same thing as in Vietnam. We were pretty much marketing our weaponry so we could sell it around the world. And what better way to market weaponry when people can see it in use? All right. And what was the deal brokered with the Taliban that Trump brokered? Why wasn't he like making a deal with the Afghan government, who are ostensibly our allies, or were? I don't know. Sounds like Putin-esque gambit to me. Look where Russia is. Anyway, was part of those negotiations of like, look, one of these like urban assault vehicle tanks is, what are they, 20 million or something? Some ungodly amount of money, let alone what a jet costs. Here, have these. We're just going to leave him here. I know that it takes a lot of work to burn the papers and, all these secret documents or documents you don't really want falling into, enemy hands. I think the Taliban's the enemy, as Trump made them our, I guess so. The GOP loves the Taliban. In fact, they'd like to be able to do what the Taliban's doing, and they're doing it here, and they're pretty much on their way. We got roving caravans of ISIS types right now, taking over small towns. We'll get into that here in the news read in just a bit. So the Taliban get to have all of our material. I used to think that we either got our material out of there. I know that it takes a lot of time to burn the papers. I guess there was a reason why there was a troop pull down to 2,500 that Trump instituted just before he left office. But I guess, you could have some standby staff. They burn the papers, and then, the other 2,500 maybe could either try to get as much of the material out of there or destroy it. But I think that there was a deal brokered, and Trump might have even gotten some money to assure, we'll just leave we'll leave the tanks. We'll leave all of the missiles, rifles, etc., 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 and jets. We'll just leave them for you. Here, have them. Have fun. And if, I guess, the Taliban were smart, they'd leave a few of the pilots alive to teach them how to fly them. Stop killing all these pilots. Yeah, that's what they do. They got hit squads going after Afghan pilots. Afghani is the money. Afghan is the person. Let's remember now. So, yeah. And the GOP is just, they're in a fit. You mean we have to let these people into our country? What? Yeah, well, as I said earlier in social media like Twitter, the shorter GOP statement right now is that, we're not even used to, all these blacks around here. And now you want to ram a bunch of Afghans down our throats? Yeah. Heard the same thing about all of those Vietnamese boat people. You were boat people. Man, if you knew the story, and I have personal experience with, quote, boat people. One quite famous one. My best friend's brother was married to her until she died of cancer. And her story with her sister and family is a horrendously brutal story of survival. On the high seas, too. That was only part of it. I mean, just getting to the point where you're almost going to be shipwrecked on the high seas. It was a horrendous story just to get to that point, and then the survival of all those people. And then to come here and find your way. When a sizable amount of people who said, we got to bomb. And now, the people that we were there to fight for and were helping us promote democracy around the world. You mean we have to count them as people now? Just don't call it racist. You might say xenophobic, but, certainly race had something to do with it, and I think race has something to do with it now. Let alone the whole issue of Muslim banning and all that BS that's been inculcated into the psyche of a certain type. Yeah, a certain type who seem, ripe for that kind of distillation. Well. We do have a curated show, as I say, pretty much around this time, sometimes later. So why don't we just go ahead and bring up that curated show so we have a little bit of order here. At the top, that was a former captain in the military saying we need to break out of that mindset that the military is the solution to all our problems. Now, it's good to hear a military type say that, but I got to tell you, hippies, punks, we've been saying that since, forever. On the rest of the menu, States banning mask mandates could face civil rights probes, and well, they should. Looking at you, Abbott. I think Joe's setting you up for some of those federal civil rights probes. The San Francisco District Attorney sued 3 California-based ghost gun makers. And a second Creswell, Oregon mayor has stepped down in less than a year after intimidation by the Proud Boys. You know, I keep telling people, if you don't purge the Nazis now, it's going to be harder to purge the Nazis later. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Belarus blocked another independent news site and raided the homes of at least 6 of its staff. And Russia labeled the Golos Get Out the Vote movement as a foreign agent just a month before the parliamentary election. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link is the link to our Patreon page. That's across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, by the way. Now, that link to our Patreon page takes you to our Patreon page. And if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, and you could send those funds our way through our Patreon link there, we are able to stretch those dollars along with what we pull out of our own wallets. Yes, we do. And that allows us to pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue this powerhouse of resistance against the hostile takeover of the United States of America. We shall not let it happen. And in our small way, we are fulfilling our civic duty, and we have you to thank for your generosity in allowing us to do so. Thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I'll tell you why. Because I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then try to get that linked up on social media like Twitter and other platforms that you know who they are. I try before the show. I really do. Anyway, the show notes and links are a very important and integral part of this, well, multimedia, overhead projector type of endeavor. So check them out. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. All right, let's tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays, by the way. Colin Binkley of the Associated Press brings us this first offering. In an escalating battle with Republican governors, President Joe Biden yesterday, Wednesday, ordered his education secretary to explore possible legal action against states that have blocked school mask mandates and other public health measures meant to protect students against COVID-19. In response, the Education Department raised the possibility of using its civil rights arm to fight policies in Florida, Texas, Iowa, and other Republican-led states that have barred public schools from requiring masks in the classroom. Biden directed Education Secretary Miguel Cardona to assess all available tools that can be used against states that fail to protect students amid surging coronavirus cases. Some state governments have adopted policies and laws that interfere with the ability of schools and districts to keep our children safe during in-person learning, Biden said in an executive order, adding that some states have gone so far as to try to block school officials from adopting safety measures. It amounts to the sharpest threat yet against states that so far have ignored admonishments from the White House during the surging pandemic. The move also injects the federal government into mounting culture wars that have turned schools into battlegrounds in a debate over masks. Think of that. A debate over public health. And they say brainwashing doesn't work. Here's another example of how it does. Well, don't both sides this now, okay? Keeping people safe against a pandemic is not the same as the right to say, I have the freedom to get sick and make everyone around me sick too. In an announcement on its website, the Education Department said policies that ban mask mandates could amount to discrimination if they lead to unsafe conditions that prevent students from attending school. The agency can launch its own investigations into potential violations, and it also responds to civil rights complaints from parents and the public. The agency's Office for Civil Rights can issue a range of sanctions up to a total loss of federal funding in cases of civil rights violations. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has pressed ahead with a ban on school mask requirements, and the state's education officials are now weighing whether to withhold salaries of some superintendents that have defied the order. Texas and at least 6 other states have instituted similar prohibitions. The state policies run counter to guidance from the CDC, which recommends universal mask wearing for students and teachers in the classroom. In its guidance, the CD cited the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant. Biden indicated last week that he believes he does not personally have the authority to overturn the policies, but he pleaded with Republican governors to reconsider their prohibitions. If they won't help, he urged them to at least get out of the way. Well, of course, them's fighting words. To those that have like a really big monetary stake in Regeneron, that palliative. In letters to Florida and Texas last week, Cardona said their prohibitions may violate the American Rescue Plan, which provided $123 billion to the nation's schools to help them return to the classroom. The policies prevent schools from developing safe reopening plans, a requirement of the legislation, he said. Similar letters are also being sent to Arizona, Iowa, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Utah, Cardona said. Let me be clear, he wrote. This department will continue to use every tool in our toolbox to protect the health and safety of students and educators, and to maximize in-person learning as the new school year begins. Associated Press staff bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. San Francisco's district attorney said he is suing 3 California companies that make and distribute ghost guns, the untraceable build-it-yourself weaponry that accounted for nearly half the firearms recovered in gun killings in the city last year. District Attorney Chesa Boudin said an announced the lawsuit at a news conference along advocates of tougher gun laws. The suit names Black Hawk Manufacturing Group, GS Performance, and MDX Corp., 3 companies that are not based in San Francisco, but are responsible for producing a large share of the firearms found in the city and elsewhere in the state. Boudin's lawsuit comes amid mounting criticism over his response to rising crime rates and a wave of anti-Asian violence in the city, which has been routinely video recorded and spread virally. Critics say the city's most powerful law enforcement officer is intolerably lenient, particularly those responsible for rampant theft, drug abuse, and street crimes. Critics say Boudin, a progressive who ran on police reform, has repeatedly declined to file charges in cases where the perpetrators went on to commit more serious crimes. Supporters praise him for following through on his criminal justice reform promises. Like the pandemic, the furor shows no sign of abating. One attempt to recall Boudin fell short last week when organizers failed to collect enough signatures, but the other attempt lives on with a deadline for signatures in October. If voters ultimately oust Boudin, Mayor London Breed, whose politics are more moderate, will choose a replacement. The lawsuit, filed jointly with the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence and the law firm Kecker, Van Nest, and Peters, alleges that the companies violated state laws that require them to apply for serial numbers, and that they misled consumers into believing the weapons were legal. It seeks a court order that would bar the companies from shipping their products in California, and also seeks monetary penalties. Ryan Bull of NPR affiliate near Eugene, Oregon, KLCC, brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Creswell's mayor has stepped down. Now, Creswell is just a bit south of Eugene, Oregon, if you know where that is. In a letter, Amy Knutson didn't give a reason, though her resignation follows citations issued against several organizers of an unpermitted 4th of July parade and a protest held outside her home weeks later. The regular parade was canceled because of the pandemic. One went ahead anyway and featured a variety of floats, including one where men held a Proud Boys banner and flashed hand signals associated with white supremacy. Oh, you know, the circle game. Knutson said protesters shared her home address and called her a member of the Chinese Communist Party. She says while 2 of the organizers were affiliated with the Proud Boys and QAnon, she doesn't think most participants and attendees were affiliated with either group. And last year, Knutson took over for Richard Zettervall after he resigned because of a contentious response to an equity and inclusion resolution. Another example of these brown shirt stormtrooper Nazis pretty much terrorizing a small town and running off an elected official. And they seem to be friends with the cops in this state. And I want to know why not more is being done to purge these Nazis and the Nazi bad apples in our law enforcement Why are they not being purged? Do we need to get a consent decree for this state from the feds? Something really has to be done, especially since this little town of Creswell is a tiny little town. But this is happening far too often in this state. Let's stop it. Okay, enough of that sermonizing. Let's get to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Shattered Lives. Stillwater, the newest movie co-written and directed by Tom McCarthy, has a lot in common with his 2015 offering, Spotlight. Both use real crime stories as source material. The earlier film was based on the Catholic priest sex abuse scandal, and Stillwater is apparently based on the Amanda Knox saga. Both show the lasting impact tragedies can have on those affected. Named for the town in Oklahoma, Stillwater follows the tale of the non-French-speaking Bill, played stoically by Matt Damon, who travels to Marseille, France, to visit his daughter Allison, who is serving time for the murder of her roommate/girlfriend Allison, who claims the real culprit was a man she met at a bar and who stole her keys. She has hope in the form of an appeal when she learns that someone has stepped forward claiming to have met the mystery man and heard him confess to others that he was the culprit. Bill, played seamlessly by the talented Matt Damon, is a good old boy oil rig worker back home and is the classic fish out of water here as he decides to stay in France in the hopes that the new revelation could free his daughter. Rounding out the cast is Camille Cotin as the friendly French neighbor and Abigail Breslin, who plays Allison. This one's strength lies in its performances because at various points, particularly in the third act, some suspension of disbelief is needed to stay with the turn of events. Without spoilers, the film's title is more than just the name of a town from where the main characters hail. It's also a clue that ultimately leaves you with questions about your assumptions. However flawed, Stillwater is worth a watch. It's more drama than thriller that will leave you remembering that often scars don't heal. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. The universe is littered with black holes, but where exactly they're all hiding, well, that's a little harder to say.
Our current inventory of black holes is still highly incomplete.
Yale astronomer Priya Natarajan says black holes present unique challenges to those keeping count.
These are dark objects that have such peculiar properties that you can never directly quite image them like we image galaxies, and therefore we have to infer their presence indirectly.
Natarajan and her colleagues recently predicted there might be a large population of previously undetected supermassive black holes, just wandering around galaxies. But supermassive black holes are, as the name implies, massively large, which makes them easier to detect compared to their relatively tiny cousins, so-called stellar mass black holes. Those are closer in mass to our sun.
If you have a stellar mass black hole, it doesn't have the same oomph, so it's trickier to detect them.
Now, researchers in Europe claim to have stumbled upon an unexpected trove of these stellar mass black holes in a puffy star cluster called Palomar 5.
In the paper, we call it's kind of the Rosetta Stone.
Marc Gilis is an astrophysicist with the University of Barcelona and the Catalan Institute for Research and Advanced Studies. He says Palomar 5 is best known for its spectacular star trails, which are studded with stars ejected from the cluster over the last 11.5 billion years. But those trails turned out to be a critical clue, tipping Gilis and his team off to a large mob of black holes. You see, the astronomers set out to determine how the trails formed, and to do that, they ran more than 36 computer simulations, in which they'd let different configurations of black holes bully around hundreds of thousands of stars for about 11 billion years.
Each of these models would run for several weeks up to several months. So they were run on special hardware, like on graphics cards, or GPUs, the ones you use for gaming, essentially.
And the hope was one of those models would spit out something that resembles Palomar 5 today. And eventually, one did.
We saw that the stars were being removed very efficiently because the black holes were basically pushing the stars away from the center.
The model explained the star trails, but it also suggested that Palomar 5 likely harbors more than 100 black holes. That's 3 times as many as the astronomers expected to find there. The details appear in the journal Nature Astronomy. Natarajan of Yale says this work gives black hole hunters another tool for their investigations.
This is another sort of indirect signature of the presence of these lurking black holes.
And it's also suggestive of just how much we could be missing in other star clusters like Pal 5.
If those globular clusters like Pal 5 are further littered with black holes, the inventory just, explodes, basically.
In other words, our current census of black holes appears to have some significant holes in it. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Kathleen Dooling. Occasional aches and pains are an expected part of life, but for many people, pain is a constant companion. Dr. Chad Helmick is with CDC's National Center for Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. He's joining us today to discuss ways to manage chronic pain. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Thank you.
Chad, how many people in the U.S. suffer from chronic pain?
In 2016, 50 million adults had chronic pain, which is pain on most or every day in the past 6 months. More interesting, though, is that 20 million people have high-impact chronic pain, which is chronic pain that also limits their work or life activities on most or every day in the past 6 months. This is a problem because chronic pain is associated not only with symptoms, but with anxiety and depression, reduced quality of life, and the risk of opioid problems.
What are the most common causes of chronic pain?
The most common causes generally relate to bones and joints, like low back pain and arthritis, but there are many other causes: headaches, sickle cell disease, fibromyalgia, surgery and injuries, and many, many others.
Is chronic pain more common in any particular group of people?
Yes, it occurs at all ages, but it's more common in older middle-aged adults and in the oldest old, 85 and older. It's also more common in women, poor people, and those who live in rural areas.
How is chronic pain treated?
Well, the first thing to do is to get a diagnosis, which can help guide treatment. But the thinking about chronic pain now is that it becomes a chronic disease by itself, regardless of the cause, and that can cause significant problems. The real goal in management is to have a manageable level of pain, not to get rid of all pain. There's several steps that can be taken, and these are sometimes difficult to do because of barriers to access. But it makes sense to do the simplest and safest things first. And these are non-drug steps. Things like physical activity. Walking is perfectly good to help reduce pain. Also, self-management education can give you some confidence in managing chronic pain when you're on your own. There's also physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological therapy, better sleep, which usually means less alcohol, and seeing a chiropractor or getting biofeedback and massage. If that's not enough, non-opioid drugs like Tylenol or Motrin and Advil or Naproxen or Aleve can help. If those don't work, then it's time to consider something stronger. Sometimes that's opioids, but there's not great evidence that opioids are good for long-term pain in most people.
Do you have any advice for people suffering from chronic pain?
Well, it's important to work with a variety of providers who are working together to help you. The goal, again, is manageable pain so you can live a productive life. This can include physical therapy, most people can walk, to treat any underlying depression or anxiety, and to avoid further injuries. Finally, the National Pain Strategy is laying out a strategic roadmap to improve pain management system in this country.
Where can listeners get more information about managing chronic pain?
Listeners can go to the NIH website, nih.gov, and type in National Pain Strategy.
Thanks, Chad. I've been talking today with Dr. Chad Helmick about ways to manage chronic pain. If you're experiencing daily pain, talk with your healthcare provider to ensure you have the correct diagnosis and know how to manage your condition. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Kathleen Dooling for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
If you're a corporate employee, you know that something unpleasant is afoot when top executives are suddenly issuing statements about how committed they are to their employees, making sure that all of them are treated with dignity and respect. For example, the PR chief of a global outfit named Teleperformance, one of the world's largest call centers, was recently going on and on about how, quote, we value our people and their well-being, safety, and happiness. Why did the corporation feel such a desperate need to proclaim its virtue? Because it's been caught in a nasty scheme to spy on its own workers. Teleperformance, a $6.7 billion global behemoth that handles customer service calls for Amazon, Apple, Uber, etc., saves money on overhead by making most of its 380,000 employees around the world work from their own homes. That can be a convenience for many workers, but a new corporate policy, first imposed in March on thousands of its workers in Colombia, is an Orwellian nightmare. Teleperformance is pressuring them to sign an 8-page addendum to their employee contracts, allowing corporate-controlled video cameras, electronic audio devices, and data collection tools to be put in their homes to monitor their actions. I work in my bedroom, one employee noted. I don't want to have a camera in my bedroom. Neither would I, and I doubt that Teleperformance's $20 million a year CEO would allow one in his mansion. Uglier yet, the privacy-obliterating contract requires that even the children of employees can be spied on at home. Nonetheless, the Colombian worker signed because her supervisor said she could lose her job if she refused. Of course, Teleperformance Inc. assures us that the data it collects on children is not shared elsewhere. But how do we know that? Trust us, they say. This is Jim Hightower saying, do you? Howdy-ho, folks. Thanks for tuning in and sharing my weekly commentaries. Also, please join me for a live web show I host every other Tuesday, the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour at the Chat and Chew Cafe. You can join the action live online as I chat with grassroots leaders and progressive sparklies from around the country. Go to hightowerlowdown.org/chatandchew to find out about upcoming guests and watch past episodes. That's hightowerlowdown.org/chatandchew.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1997. That was the day that a strike by the Teamsters Union against UPS ended with a victory for the union. The strike had started 15 days earlier. More than 180,000 UPS workers participated in the action. It was the first nationwide strike by UPS workers. At the time, UPS delivered 80% of all packages in the United States. The company, known for its signature brown trucks, delivered 12 million packages a day. The key issue of the strike was that the company increasingly relied on part-time workers. The insecurities of part-time work were growing not just at UPS, but for workers in industries all across the country. The strike settlement came with the union winning its core issues. The company agreed to convert 10,000 part-time jobs to full-time positions over the course of the next 5 years. The victory was significant for the U.S. labor movement. The 1980s and 1990s saw new attacks on labor unions and working people, starting with President Ronald Reagan's breaking of the Air Traffic Controller Union strike in 1981. The UPS victory in a national strike with broad rank-and-file support encouraged working people beyond the Teamsters Union. Announcing the settlement of the strike, ABC News anchor Peter Jennings declared, quote, "It's been the most dramatic confrontation between industry and organized labor in 2 decades. Teamsters President Ron Carey said, quote, "It's what this country needs. Decent jobs, a chance for the dream, a chance to purchase a home, a chance to bring your children up properly, a chance to send them to college. Enough is enough, and it's about time that people start fighting back on this." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 57 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of about 85, abundant sunshine with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, a few passing clouds tonight, otherwise generally clear, lows in the mid-50s with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Partly cloudy skies tomorrow, Friday, with highs near 80, winds out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases in Jackson County of coronavirus. In Jackson County, in the southern part of Oregon, continue to spike as this county leads the state and pretty high in the country for this coronavirus spike that we are experiencing. We have now are at 155,078, and the deceased have now increased by, it looks like, 3 more, and we stand at 177. And people continue to argue about why they have to wear a mask. Grass pollen, though, is low right outside the window in Rogue River proper. The air quality index is moderate for the region at 84 parts per million, and we are in an air quality advisory. Right here at the mothership, the air quality isn't as bad, but we will be breathing filtered air in a bit here when we close up. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.09 inches. Visibility is at 8 miles, and relative humidity is at 83%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 70 degrees and mostly cloudy. Paris is 66 and cloudy. Rome is 86 and fair. Kyiv is 73 and fair. Kabul is 80 degrees and fair, if you think it's fair. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 80 and fair. Sydney, Australia is 60 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 58 degrees and mostly cloudy. And New York is a muggy 80 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. Waiting for that hurricane to come, eh? Well, that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Yuris Carmano of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Belarusian authorities blocked the website of the country's leading independent news agency and detained some journalists after raiding their apartments as part of a sweeping crackdown on independent media and human rights activists. Police searched the office of Belapan News Agency and the apartments of at least 6 of its staff. The agency's website was no longer available online. Belapan is the oldest and the only large independent news agency left in Belarus, operating since 1991. It's been one of the last major independent media outlets still operating. The raids follow the worst traditions of the Soviet times. People are being woken up early in the morning. They are being threatened and intimidated. Belapan journalist Tatiana Karanakova, who has left Belarus, told the AP, "Today I woke up at 7 a.m. to messages from colleagues in our editorial chat about massive raids." The Belarusian Association of Journalists urged authorities to stop pressuring the news agency and to release its detained staff. Authoritarian President Alexander Lukashenko faced months of protests triggered by his being awarded a 6th term in August 2020 vote that the opposition and the West saw as rigged. He responded to the demonstrations with a massive crackdown that saw more than 35,000 people arrested and tens of thousands beaten by the police.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staffan Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Russia's Justice Ministry said that it has declared the Golos independent vote monitoring movement as a foreign agent just a month before the parliamentary election. Golos, in 2013, had been among the first non-governmental organizations to be declared as a foreign agent, which effectively suspended its operations. It has since been reorganized as a civil movement and resumed its work. We have no doubts that the current attack on the largest community of independent elections observers just a month before the day of the vote is an attempt to prevent the citizens of Russia from using the right to observe the elections, Golos said in a statement. The government, which denies a crackdown is underway, uses the foreign agent designation to label foreign-funded organizations that it says are engaged in political activity. The Justice Ministry document cited a citizen of Armenia as the source of Golos's funding. Grigory Melakanians, co-chair of the movement, called that nonsense on social media. The term foreign agent carries negative Soviet-era connotations and subjects those designated to extra government scrutiny. Golos urged Russians on Wednesday to register as election observers and continued and pledged to continue its work. Several opposition figures, mainly affiliated with jailed Kremlin critic Navalny, Putin's most serious political challenger, have been ruled out from taking part in the elections. Well. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we'll meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. T'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.